So, you wish to learn the secrets of the soul? Well, that's easy with Illuminor Szeras. But first, don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with all the newest deck techs. Let's begin. Illuminor Szeras reads, 2 and a black for a legendary artifact creature Necron 3/3. Secrets of the Soul. Tap, sacrifice another creature, add an amount of black mana equal to the sacrificed creature's mana value. This card is super cool, because we can turn creatures we've cheated out in one way or another into ramp and play massive spells or gigantic creatures. The first way we get expensive creatures into play is by unearthing them, such as Archfiend of Sorrows, which is 5 a black and a black for a 4/5 creature demon with flying. When Archfiend of Sorrows enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. With Unearth, 3 a black and a black, return this creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, it gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step, or, if it would leave the battlefield, unearth only as a sorcery. This card has a little bit more on the expensive side to unearth, but has the advantage of wiping out some of your opponent's smaller creatures. The bump in mana from 5 to 7 isn't huge, but with a pseudo board wipe attached to it, this creature is still not a bad option. First Sphere Gargantua is 4 a black and a black for a 5/4 creature horror. When First Sphere Gargantua enters the battlefield, you draw a card and lose 1 life, with Unearth 2 and a black. Paying 3 mana, sacrificing this to get 6 mana, and drawing a card off the exchange is the exact kind of thing this deck wants to be doing. I genuinely wish there was more Unearth cards that are this quality, because if there were, this deck would be absolutely devastating to play against. Grixis Slave Driver is 5 and a black for a 4/4 creature zombie giant. When Grixis Slave Driver leaves the battlefield, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Unearth 3 and a black. 4 mana to get 6 mana isn't that bad, especially since it gets us closer to casting some of our lower drop powerful creatures. The extra body as a blocker is really sweet as well. Viscera Dragger is 3 and a black for a 3/3 creature zombie ogre warrior with cycling 2. Discard this card, draw a card, and unearth 1 and a black. I like Viscera Dragger quite a bit because it can get itself into our graveyard on its own and draws us a card in doing so. It bumps us up 2 mana, which is about average in this deck, all in all a solid conclusion. Royal Warden is 3 a black and a black for a 3/2 artifact creature Necron. Phalanx Commander. When Royal Warden enters the battlefield, create 2 tapped 2/2 black Necron warrior artifact creature tokens with Unearth 3 and a black. Royal Warden is a really sweet addition to decks like these. By unearthing it, not only do we get 1 extra mana off of sacrificing it to Illuminor Szeras, but it also comes in with 2 extra bodies. Extractor Demon is 4 a black and a black for a 5/5 flying creature type demon. When another creature leaves the battlefield, you may have target player put the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. With Unearth 3 and a black, Extractor Demon is another one of those great Unearth cards. We get 3 mana extra off of sacrificing it. It can mill us to get even more cards into our grave, plus it swings in for a turn as a 5/5 flyer. Locust Heavy Destroyer is 1 a black and a black for a 3/2 flying artifact creature Necron with Amnetic Exterminator. When Locust Heavy Destroyer enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature with Unearth 5 black. The Locust Heavy Destroyer isn't an amazing choice of card to unearth since you won't get any mana out of the exchange, but it is pseudo removal that hits all players and comes from the grave. That's pretty sweet in my book. Another way to cheat creatures into play for less than their mana cost is by reanimating them. We achieve this by using the following cards. Persist is 1 and a black for a sorcery. Return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. Persist is a good reanimation card, far from the best we run, but the downside of a -1/-1 counter is usually not very relevant with the creatures we plan on reanimating. Animate Dead is 2 and a black, enchantment aura, enchant creature in a graveyard. When Animate Dead enters the battlefield, if it's on the battlefield, it loses Enchant Creature card in a graveyard and gains Enchant Creature card put onto the battlefield with Animate Dead. Return target Enchanted Creature card from the battlefield under your control and attach Animate Dead to it. When Animate Dead leaves the battlefield, that creature's controller sacrifices it. Enchanted Creature gets -1/-0. That is the most long-winded way possible of saying put a creature card from your graveyard onto your battlefield and equip this to it. Animate Dead follows a similar template to Persist in that it gets us back a creature with a bit of a downside. although it's far from being enough of a downside for us to care most games. Reanimate is 1 black for a sorcery. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Ah yes, the classic Reanimation spell. Literally the card which the name of the strategy is based off of. Losing a chunk of life can be a hindrance, especially when you're reanimating something big, but the cushion of 40 life that Commander offers helps soften the blow by a bit. Apprentice Necromancer is 1 and a black for a creature zombie wizard, 1/1, black tap, sacrifice Apprentice Necromancer, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature gains haste. At the beginning of the next end step, sacrifice it. Apprentice Necromancer effectively gives a creature Unearth 1 for a turn. This can be great for the creatures we run with strong ETB abilities. Do remember though that Apprentice Necromancer has summoning sickness, so you'll have to wait until it gets back to your turn to use it. Nim Deathmantle is a 2-drop artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, has Intimidate, and is a black zombie. Whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 4. If you do, return that card to the battlefield and attach Nim Deathmantle to it. Equip cost 4. Nim Deathmantle is cool because it can let us reanimate a creature, get some mana off the exchange, and re-trigger ETB abilities all in one card. It is a little expensive to get going mana-wise, but the whole point of this deck is trying to do things with big mana. Absolute auto-include. Now that we have some ways to get creatures back from the grave, we're going to need some creatures worth reanimating. Abhorrent Overlord is 5 a black and a black. Creature demon with flying and 6/6. When Abhorrent Overlord enters the battlefield, put a number of 1/1 black harpy creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield equal to your devotion to black. Each black pip in the mana cost of your permanents you control count towards your devotion to black. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. Abhorrent Overlord is an army in a can. It's a single card that can flood your board with tokens very easily. Plus it's a 6/6 flyer on its own, meaning it's no slouch when it comes to getting damage in. Butcher of Malakir is 5 a black and a black for a 5/4 creature vampire warrior with flying. When Butcher of Malakir or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Butcher of Malakir is a great inclusion since it synergizes with our commander so much. We hope to sacrifice a creature every turn, so making our opponent sacrifice creatures as well is a must-have effect. Grave Titan is 4 a black and a black for a 6/6 creature giant with Death Touch. Whenever Grave Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, put 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield. Grave Titan's cool because of the zombies. Getting zombies on entry and when it attacks can leave us a few solid blockers sitting around to chump any attacks that might come our way. Gravewaker is 4 a black and a black for a 5/5 creature bird spirit with flying. 5 black black, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tap. Gravewaker can reanimate cards and be reanimated itself. It's very mana intensive to reanimate this way, but having the option is better than not being able to reanimate anything at all. Massacre Worm is 3 a black for a creature type worm 6/5. When Massacre Worm enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. Massacre Worm can wipe the board of your opponent's smaller creatures and deals damage to them while doing so. And at only 6 mana, sometimes you don't even need to cheat it into play. Sheoldred Whispering One is a 5 and a black for a 6/6 legendary creature Praetor with Swamp Walk. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. Sheoldred is a reanimation effect every one of our turns and makes our opponents sacrifice creatures? That's bananas and the exact kind of card we're looking for. Now that we have ways to reanimate creatures and creatures we want to reanimate, let us next turn to how on earth we're getting these creatures in the graveyard in the first place. Buried Alive is 2 and a black for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them in your graveyard, then shuffle your library. This lets us get the best 3 cards in our deck right where we want them to be. There isn't a hard and fast rule on which creatures to dump into our grave, but a bit of advice I can give is to consider how devastating giving all of your opponent's creatures -2/-2 until end of turn would be. If it's very devastating, then we definitely want to grab one of our pseudo board wipes. Stinkweed Imp is 2 and a black for a 1/2 creature imp with flying. Whenever Stinkweed Imp deals combat damage to a creature, destroy that creature with Dredge 5. If you would draw a card, instead you may put exactly 5 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Otherwise, draw a card. Turning draw into Dredge is pretty sweet, and we can turn our draw for the turn into Dredge 5 as well. Another version of this deck would run a lot of discard effects to get cards like this back into our grave, but this isn't that deck tech. Entomb is 1 black instant, search your library for a card, put that card into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. This is the quintessential card for getting creatures in the bin. It's considered a classic for a reason, it's just so good. Corpse Connoisseur is 4 and a black for a 3/3 creature zombie wizard. When Corpse Connoisseur enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature card and put that card into your graveyard. If you do, shuffle your library with Unearth 3 and a black. May seem odd to include Corpse Connoisseur here instead of when I was talking about the Unearth cards. The reason behind that is we don't really care as much about the Unearth part of this card. It's one of the few ways we have to get cards into our grave, and with Reanimation cards aplenty, we can pull this off multiple times. This brings us to the next part of this deck tech. Sacrifice enhancers. We're going to be sacrificing a lot of creatures, so we might as well get some value off of doing so. We accomplish this by playing cards like Blood Artist, 1 and a black for a 0/1 creature vampire. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The classic Blood Artist effect, so much so that the type of card is named after it. And don't forget, this says when a creature dies. That includes our opponent's creatures as well. Zulaport Cutthroat is a 1 and a black for a 1/1 creature human rogue ally. Whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Zulaport Cutthroat is similar to Blood Artist, but it hits all of our opponents instead of just 1, and only triggers off of our creatures dying. Midnight Reaper is 2 and a black for a creature zombie knight. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. Drawing cards is great. Doing so when we sacrifice a creature means we can trigger this relatively frequently. And that's it. That's the deck. Do you have any inclusions I missed? If so, leave them in the comments below. And if you want to support me in what I do, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon. But even if you can only subscribe here on YouTube, know that that's plenty enough for me. Thank you very much and have a great day.